So we start with relevance. How can we make it relevant to them? How can we make them understand that they need this material? It's something useful to them. And that's a job we have to work at sometimes to find out how can we make that thing relevant. And sometimes we can ask them some questions, get them involved. But so that's really the start of the process. It's you got to tell them what's in it for them and provide good analogies and things like that. And that's what we got to work at. And here's a place where we can use case studies. There's lots of ways you can make relevance come to light. But you got to think about it and use it in a positive way. Just say, okay, how can I get them to think about what we're going to do and why we're going to do it? Next, we go with the involvement. And the involvement is really trying to get them moving from a passive student to an active student. How many times you've been in a classroom and some people are turned off? They're not even paying attention to you. They're working with their cell phone or doing something else. Well, the easiest way to deal with this in a classroom typically is with a small group process. They can't get away with that in a small group. They get away with it in the large group. So I use a lot of facilitation of small groups, 4 to 5, 4 to 6 people in a small group, and let them. I try to break it up so each of them have something to do that's theirs. So it's very important that we do that as part of the process. We allow them sometimes assist us in diagnosing their needs. Tell us what you need. We've got to have all the answers. Adults really want to be involved in all aspects of the learning process. And as I told you yesterday, Dustin, I'm interested in trying to develop learning that sticks to their ribs, that when they walk out of the classroom, they learn something they could use and put into effect. So I want them to internalize it. I want them to experience what we taught, not merely having heard it. So, and adults always learn best in a hands-on way. When they touch it, feel it, smell it, like you become part of it. It's very important that we give them all those chances, and that's part of it. And doing provides the learner with the ability to validate the concept in a hands-on way. And that's why you teach them something, then you get them a chance to do an activity, and you find out they really got what you told them. And that's why it's a pretty important part of the process. And so you're doing evaluation all the time as you go along. Okay. Now, by the way, some people get confused with involvement being an experience. Involvement is the active part of having the student do things. Experience is the knowledge, skills, and abilities that the student brings to the classroom. Where are they? We're going to start at their level. We can't start. We don't want to be too low for them, but we don't want to be too high for them either. Sometimes we can start teaching at a higher level than they're ready for.
Do you find facilitation difficult when there is a large amount of students?
Because I'm doing what works best. I'm breaking them into small pieces. I'm dealing with 5 and 6 people at a time rather than dealing with 30 people at a time or 40 people at a time. If I can have 7 groups of 6 for 42 people, I can work with them very easily, going around the room and kind of see what they're doing. And as I was telling Dustin yesterday, I'm very much a proponent of flip charts and have them write things up and have them really see what they're thinking, what they're doing. Can you see where they're going? And that way I can facilitate very easily. And I also can watch. I can give them some ideas, some things they didn't think about. Yeah, and I find facilitation in a large group not very difficult at all. It's sort of fun, by the way, if you can do it that way. And sometimes you don't have a chance to walk around, but they still can be doing things, different tasks for different people in there. I'll talk to some things at the end. I don't want to carry this too far. Next, we're going to go into discovery. My experience has been that the student discovers on their own is the most powerful learning tool there is. And a lot of times you want them to discover that what they previously knew was not right. It's possible that they've learned some bad things in their lifetime, and maybe they need to be brought around to what's the right way to do something. And they could have been doing it wrong for a long time. So we want to discover that. We want to add new tools to their toolbox. We're sharing principles and techniques. And that's what it's like where I see RIDEM. It's sort of a set of tools that we're giving them that they didn't have before. We want them to have a way of how you think about the learning process. And here we're talking about how adults learn about things, how they do things. And this is where I see the aha moment. If you get them to have that aha moment, that's the goal in life. I think those kinds of things are very necessary and very useful. And it gets the learner actually again involved in doing things. And today with the computer, we can design lessons where they do things on the computer and where they're given a little task to do, and they don't have to spend a long time. Maybe even having them learn what a term is, see what kind of things they can find on the internet about those terms. Maybe everybody has a different term, and then they share it with everybody else, small groups. And they look at it, talk about it, and then share it back with everybody else. That's one way you could use it.
Can I comment real quick
Yeah.
and actually ask you a question about it? So one of the challenges that we see in the QAP program is changing the paradigm from the sage on stage, the source of truth being the instructor behind the podium, to that
Right,
discovery process where the student actually is tasked with some experience where they actually come to that information themselves. And as you indicated, discover it and have that aha moment. What would
right.
you say is the best way that the guys like Brent and I could help instruct these instructors on changing that paradigm from instructor centered to student centered so they go through that discovery process?
Just like we said, where you give them a small task to do and let them talk about that in their small group and all different tasks. Each group has a different task to work on. Okay. Now they're finding out that they're doing something unique. They're getting involved in a small group and they're feeding it back to the larger group. And so you're really getting them to think this is the way we want business to be taught. We don't want to be setting up and having PowerPoint to death. And we have that. We're very good at that. PowerPoint was probably the worst thing in the world. And I was bad at that. I was a time in life where I started out with Harvard graphics because I'm an old dude, right? And then PowerPoint was, wow, this is cool. But the point is that it's very easy to do that. And what we've got to get them out of doing is taking this shortcut and easy way to do the training. We've got to get them to think about the best way to do the training. And hopefully this model causes them to do that and think about it some.
Okay.
And to take it and have what you're really doing in this is having them put increased responsibility on the learner. We've always put that responsibility on the trainer. We got to try to we got to transfer that. We got to do a transformation process where we're changing the way we think and the way we do business. Make sense?
Yes, sir.
Absolutely.
And I love it when they finally get it. Okay. It's kind of fun. And then we finally get down, we're talking about the experience factor. So what does that mean? We're really talking about what I said, knowledge, skills, and abilities that they bring to the classroom. The more we can know about kind of who they are and where they stand. For instance, you're teaching a SWAT class. You got guys who've all been through SWAT training. They're not, this isn't a guy who's never been to SWAT training. He's been doing it for a while. So what do they want to be trained in? Do they want to go back to the basics? No, they want something more advanced. And so we got to work with them and find out, what do you want? What are your needs? It doesn't hurt to ask them what those needs are, by the way. What do you like to get out of this class? We always think we got to tell them what they're going to get out of the class. Sometimes we ask them, what do they want to get? What are you looking for? What's your goals? And see what they have to say. And you might be surprised. Some of the answers you get are very unique and better than you would have come up with on your own. I always think the other thing about the small group process is the fact that all of us are smarter than any of us. And when you put people together in a collective sense, there's good stuff comes out of that. And you're sometimes very surprised what does come out of it. Okay. But we can really build on that experience and make it count and try to capitalize on it best we can. The more you know the learner, the better chance you have of pulling things out of them, right? And that's also part of what we're going to try to do. We're trying to pull things out of them, whether they're, and we're not talking about a one-way street here. We're talking about a two-way street, but we want most of it coming from them instead of us going to them. Most of our training has been transmitted learning. We just transmitted learning. Now we're doing some receiving learning.
Just a quick comment. I wanted to
Yeah.
thank you for that because during my audits, one of the biggest things that I love to see, especially during like student introduction, is when the instructor asks the question, what do you want out of this class? Or is there a specific thing that you're looking for? And I always like to hear that. So I appreciate your comment on that.
But think how good that would be if you did it in a small group process where they put it up on a flip chart. Okay. And instead of asking a person, we'll get a collective process and, they have to give us something. Where you ask people the question, sometimes nobody wants to answer it because they feel like, oh, I don't really know. I don't know if I really have the answer to his question. But when we put them in a small group, they have to put it on a flip chart. You're going to get something back, and you're going to get a collective sense rather than the individual sense. And that's how you get this thing really working in the right direction. And I think it's fun. That's how crazy I am. I mean, I find that to be super challenging and super fun to see what I can pull out of it. I've been doing this for a while, and when we started the master instructor course, I did that for 20 years of facilitation. And so, I've got a little bit of experience doing something. Okay. And then the modeling. And this is where we want to model the behavior we want them to adopt. We can't say we want them to be the active learner and tell us stuff and then we sort of shove it down their throat. It's really important that we open the door and we start talking in open fashion about things. And we want to model things. I was telling Dustin yesterday that I'm a fan of John Wooden. And Wooden, of course, was, very successful basketball coach. And his model was to explain things and demonstrate them and then, have them imitate it. And then he would critique it. And then he asked them to do it again and again and again and again. It was again and again and again were not all the same things over again. It was the same thing, but it was in a different perspective, And he'd always say, be quick, but don't hurry. We can see that's where we get a chance to put on our kind of critique hat, and they do something that doesn't quite go right. Let's talk about what went wrong. Why did it go wrong? What happened here? What was the problem? Why did we see this in a way that we didn't get it done the right way? And what could we have done better? There's nothing wrong with that either. And that's something we ought to be challenging ourselves to say, how could we do things better? And we want them to model the desired behavior, especially as instructors. One of the things to say right away was developed primarily for training instructors, because that's how you develop a learning activity. But anybody who does any kind of training can do this kind of thing, can use RIDEM in a positive way. As I say, my pastor does it, and he's learned to say, he's saying, he says, how can I make this relevant? And he says, why do you need to know this part about what Jesus was saying? What was this all about? And that was important for him to think that through and come up with something. And he did. And he's doing it very well, very successful. Okay, that's kind of everything in a nutshell.
So, Jim, one of the dimensions that we look at when we're assessing a course is learner validation. Like you mentioned, did it stick to the ribs? Is it really something they're going to be able to apply? Like we talked about on Bloom's, at least, that minimum apply level. What thoughts can you convey to us on the connection or the nexus between a course or a learning objective, a learning activity, and learning assessment? How are those
well, first off, you're taking something, you're building an objective. This is what I want the students to come out of the class knowing. Okay, that's what you start with, right? And objectives are hard to write, but that's a challenge for us. It still doesn't mean you can't do them. They're doable. So you write a good objective, which means, and the part about the objective is most important is not just having the objective, but it is to what standard are we asking for? Standards are the thing we miss about objectives sometimes. What level are we asking them to be able to do it at? We got to have that in our mind also. In fact, there's some ways to do that that are good enough. But then the activity is to say, do they really get it? And then we get to see if they got it or didn't get it. And that's where we can do the real assessment. When they're doing it, we find out that they really get what we ask them to get, what we want them to get. And I think that assessment process it's going to be fun. Sometimes we make the assessment think it's a negative. It's not a negative. It's a reinforcement of the learning. And it's a way of us ensuring that they got what they're supposed to get. Does that make sense?
Yep.
That it's not. We've got to get rid of the negatives we have about some of these things. They're really, really good, not the bad. And just like what you guys are doing, what you're doing is trying to make sure people have a standard they stick to. We want them to come to the standard we're looking for. So I believe standards are a big deal. And so that's what all of this is about: is trying to make sure everything is done at an appropriate level, and the student gets out of it what we want them to get out of it. I want to walk out knowing. And I still have people like master instructors who I'm still talking to them. They're still good friends, and they're still come to me to be a mentor. It's still for assessment, that kind of stuff. I do it all the time. I think nothing of it. You did it with me, and I think it's the way business ought to be done, and you ought to be doing it with your students in the future. And see, that's another thing for them to know that you're a resource for them. Sometimes they don't think that, so they see you as they come in here and looking at us, they're evaluating us. But the point is, I'm still a resource for you. If you get in a place down the road and you have some struggles, give me a call, send me an email. I'd be glad to give you some help. In fact, it's good to me. It's good for you to challenge me occasionally. My class, I love that people don't believe it's first aid. How do I teach first aid? I don't tell them what I'm going to teach them. I let them tell me what they think they need. I say, okay, guys, tell me what kind of things you've had in emergencies over the last 2 years that were big deals that we ought to really know a little bit more about. And obviously, when you got a classroom of people, you're going to get a lot of different stuff. And then I said, take your group, you pick one of the ones you want, and then you teach it back to everybody else. And it's surprising how good it gets. And you guys can use a computer, you can use anything you want to use. I want you to do the best you can in this lesson. I want you to teach people what they need and figure out how you run a learning activity. That makes sense. Denny's restaurant was a scenario that I built years and years ago. I used it while I was still actively training. Lieutenant was his birthday, and his family had given him a brand new Sig Sauer and holster. And they were all going to go out to dinner, and the kids wanted to go to Denny's, and he was going to take his wife to a 5-star restaurant. So they're off to Denny's. They load up, but the kids say, "Hey, Dad, take your gun. Take your new gun." So this guy's never shot this gun, And so he goes to the restaurant. He's standing. The first thing he say when you walk into a Denny's is, "Please wait to be seated." And he's in the line there. He looks up and he sees a guy that looks a lot like somebody he thinks he saw on a wanted poster. And he thought about it for a while. He said, "Hey, that wanted poster had he had an Oakland Raider tattooed on his forearm." He looks at, there's this Oakland Raider tattoo. Now he's got to what he's got to do is get the hell out of that restaurant. So the first one we want to get out of there, the first learning activity we have is when they come on and say, what do you say to your family to get them to come and follow you without ever asking you any questions. And honestly, most people have never thought much about doing that. And so that's a little chance to talk about that. How would you do that? Well, one of the things that has come out is probably the best practices thing would be to say, hey, I forgot my wallet. We're going to go back home and get it. And when I say that, kids, don't ask any questions. Just come out of that restaurant with me. Get out. But that's the kind of stuff. That's a little learning activity that's good for everybody to get a little thinking about how do we do that. This is some pre-planning stuff. And then the next day with that getting outside, I'm outside now. The lieutenant says, hey, he calls the police and says, he calls dispatch and says, hey, he's got a guy who's a suspect. And said, try to see if you can find that wanted poster. Sometimes that's not as easy as everyone thinks it is. You know, that wanted poster was up there when it was hot, but those things get taken off the bulletin board and nobody even knows where they are anymore. I told Dustin that happened at the Olympics. They couldn't find Eric Rudolph's picture when they had him in custody. But that's a whole other story. So now you got to talk about how are we going to respond to this restaurant? You're going to make somebody going to be a patrol supervisor. How are you going to tell your team to come to that restaurant? And to come blue lights and highway. This guy hasn't done anything yet. He's just in line. You know, we want to make sure it's him first off, but we're not. There's no reason to take this to a level that's beyond what it should be, because we're just responding to an information thing. And then we have some detectives coming, and they're going to come, and they're. I tell them they're 2 hours. They're 20 minutes away. I want you to tell me the questions you're going to ask this lieutenant when you get on the scene, and you come up with a list of all those questions. So everybody's got something different going on. And now this is the dispatchers. What are you going to do? And what are we going to do with the patrol supervisor? Give everybody a little task that's a little different to have to deal with. And so it becomes kind of interesting when you see everybody doing that. And the scenario goes on, and the guy does the rest of it. It turns out that as we were talking about yesterday, the place we built this scenario was originally the IRS headquarters down the street from the Denny's restaurant. And it's now been a DEA headquarters. So now you know there's some guys in that restaurant who were armed, and now we got a new scenario. If that guy does something at that counter, we better be prepared to understand that part of it too. With DEA guys all sitting there having a sandwich or whatever they do. But it's a fun scenario, and I've done it for 20 years, and it just got better and better because we had more and more tools. That we got better maps, we got better overhead pictures, we got inside pictures we took in the Denny's restaurant, we got some stuff from managers, got lots of stuff that made it come to life, made it more real than it could be otherwise.
Jim, thanks. I love listening to you. You make some great points, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, well, I got to tell you what, I never lost my excitation for what I was doing. I always was excited about being that guy, okay, whatever it was. Sometimes I was the key guy and I got to do it. Sometimes I wasn't, but I was always excited about it because I think training is an exciting endeavor. And when I find people being passive about it as trainers, then that sort of gets me going on them. I think they really shouldn't be in the training business.
Absolutely. And I like the fact that you said it earlier about being a resource because I believe that's a big part of what we do as auditors is, yeah, we're checking the course, but we're also there to help them to make it better for future courses.
See, I think if you see a role that way, it makes it better. Okay. If you see yourself as totally an evaluator only, you're really shorting yourself and shorting them because they need you. They don't have your skills. They don't have your level of doing things. You guys are older, wiser, and have the job you have because you know more than they do. So you can help them. You can be a very useful resource. That makes sense?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
and I don't want to speak for Brent, but one of the most significant challenges that I see when I'm assessing is the I in RIDEM. I think that it's a stretch for many people, many instructors to change from that paradigm where they're involving the students.
There's no question you're giving up power. Okay? You think you are, but you're really in a more powerful position when you're facilitating and getting things done than you are when you're representing it as a lecturer.
Best advice would give to Brent and I when we're counseling these folks after the class on changing their approach. How would you frame that to them?
Well, I think the fact is that the first way I would tell them is we're not asking you to do it in one swell swoop, right? You don't have to do it all big deal. And you start trying some little things and get comfortable with them. Because, I always heard I don't know if you've ever seen one of the t-shirts from MIDT, but one of them is eat the elephant one bite at a time, right? You don't try to take it all off. And sometimes you got to tell people, just try one of these things. Just try the small group and see how that works for you. And try getting the people to ask to do a little needs assessment. What do you want to get out of the class? That's a good place to start. And the other stuff you may do the way you've always done it. You still may doing some PowerPoints. But the one thing you want to get them to do, the change I want them to do, is to try to build a learning activity of some sort and try that. That's going to be that's probably in most cases going to be a stretch for them. And see, one of the things you'd see when when I did the ICI course and like, I did the ICI instructor course for a long time, and they always had to do a learning activity. And that was one of their challenges, to build one in their area of expertise. And so I want to help them do that. I want to make them make that jump. Sometimes you're right; they have a very hard time getting off the dime. They're not and they're very comfortable where they've been, and they're really not comfortable saying this is all new to me. But yeah, it's new to us, but we're doing it. We're feel very good about it. And I think that's the thing you can share with them. That's good. It was. I'm not sure I was accepting of all of this when I first started the first time. Okay, myself. Okay, and I tell you, now I use it. Now I feel comfortable about it, and now it's a tool for me, and I feel different about it. If you go in and really stretch the positive stuff and really say this is what we're here for, and they really start seeing that and say, hey, geez, that was good, but to tell you, get some ideas of how you could get that to happen in your class. They love that. Let me tell you some ways you could get involved in here. I watched you, and I think involvement was probably a tough thing for you. But let me tell you ways you could do that. Let me tell you how I do it. Some of the things I've done, and again, probably the hardest thing for most people is to be accepting with a small group process. Okay, yeah. I told Dustin yesterday, my master's degree I studied under Malcolm Knowles, who's considered to be the father of adult learning. And I tell you what, when that classroom first time, we sat down in small groups, and he said, hey, what you're going to do, you're going to be graded on. And one thing is you're going to keep a journal of the learning process for this whole course. And you're going to turn that journal in, and we're going to grade the journal. That's going to be that's going to be 75% of your grade. Wow. That was something I never had heard before. Never even thought about it. But it was probably the best thing I ever did. Maybe take good notes, make me do things, and pay attention, and everything it's like meeting somebody for the first time. Say I meet Dustin for the first time. If I was forced to write his name down and capture it and do, I'd probably remember it better than if I didn't. Right. So part of that is what's happening. It's part of the learning process. And how we cause the learning to stick has a lot to do with the whole process. And this is about process.
Well, when you talk about writing things down, that just really underscores the need to use that poster paper, get the markers out, and have them start jotting down their thoughts,
Well, see, that's what
their
you talk about
experience.
facilitating large groups. When you get them put it down, you don't have you get to see what they're thinking. Okay, you get to walk around and observe that. You don't have to ask what they're thinking. You get to see it, and you give them a task to do, and get them to put it up on the board. That makes them also have to think a little harder. And flip charts are a wonderful tool for adult learning.
All right.
You guys are an exciting place in your life, by the way, and you are a place where the biggest thing that's important about what you do is you can make a difference. And that's not everybody gets an opportunity to be in a place where they can make a difference. And you got to see everything in a way that you're looking at trainers who are reaching a group of people. You really see how exponentially it's growing outwards. Okay. So you're only dealing with an instructor at the time, but they're dealing with students, and they're going to grow and they're going to be better. And that's what it's all about. I find training to be terribly exciting. I couldn't be more enthused about it. I mean, I've done it all my life in some way or another. And I'm where I am in St. Simon's Island because I was recruited to come to FLETC, Federal Law Enforcement Training Center, to put together their terrorism programs that they didn't have any. And so I got to come here and I was assigned as a special advisor to the director. And I got to put 6 terrorism trainers in a year. They had never put anything together in a year. Okay? It just wasn't in their mindset. But I came in because I already had a lot of experience. This isn't something I didn't have to go and do any research. I've already been doing this stuff for years. So it makes a real difference where you are. Just like this one. Here's what guy you come in with a different sort of approach than the guy who'd say, I'm going to teach a SWAT class for the first time. That's a total different end than the guy who's been doing it for a while, right? So that's your experience side. That's the one difference in involvement experience. That's what you bring to the process. I already got a lot of stuff under my belt, and I'm going to build on what I got. But I know what they need. So I know some of what they need. I know what I could have used. Next time I just got to look back and say, what could I use? And what would have been better for me if somebody given this to me? I said the other day with you about geometry. Nobody ever told me that you'd never use geometry after high school. Now, if any of you are builders, but I'm a bit of a builder, I use geometry all the time. And it's something I wish somebody had told me that when I was learning it, because that was irrelevant. So if they told me, I might have paid more attention if I thought I might use it again.
All right. Jim, I
Think
am.
that'll help you?
It will. I just wanted to extend my gratitude, not just from me, but on behalf of the QAP program. And we appreciate all that you've done for the profession, for the Master Instructor program, and what you continue to do. And if it's okay with you, I'm going to hit you up every once in a while with questions.
I always enjoy that. I can do that. And Post has been good to me. I mean, I was very well. You probably know I was very well rewarded by Post. And and I've got the epitome of their awards, which I thought were wonderful. I don't know if I always deserved them, but I got them. And, I guess I bullshitted somebody.
Jim, I just want to second what Dustin said. I just appreciate just sitting here listening to you. I've learned so much, and I just appreciate your knowledge and what you've done for this profession. And I know your concepts are still being utilized and they're still strong. And in fact, I'm auditing a course right as we speak, and everything that you say, I look at as I'm auditing, and so I just appreciate your knowledge. And again, I appreciate you taking the time to help us on this and continue. So thank you.
I would never miss the opportunity, by the way. I mean, that's part of what training is all about, the opportunities to do something that you have and share it. And I'm never hesitant to do that. I think it's anybody who doesn't do that needs to get in another line of work. But I'm also nice to me. I'm going to be 86 in October. I've got some, when you talk about the word experience,
You've probably forgotten more about this than I will ever know, Jim.
guys, keep doing what you're doing. You're important to the process. I appreciate what you guys do, and I appreciate the fact that you're going to make things better for those people who are doing it. Okay?
Thank you, sir.
Thank
Okay,
you.
man.
All right. Have a great day.
Good. Take care, guys.
Bye.
Bye.